All right, guys, we are live once again. And today I am going to be doing a Q&A, but I also really want to talk about a very specific topic. And it's one that came up in conversation when just chatting with one of my clients recently about kind of all the trends in training information that's online on social media today. And this is especially true now with kind of the optimal training crowd and just all the people focused on teaching information online about training, um, you know bodybuilding training, building muscle, everything in that department. Kind of what's the accepted norm online versus what's really going on in reality, right? So the main point really is that if you're somebody who maybe you train at home, maybe you don't have access to, you know, great gyms, great bodybuilders, lifters, you're really not in that atmosphere or that environment, learning from people actually in the trenches. And you're just simply somebody that gets all your information about lifting and building muscle online. It's very easy to just assume that everybody is doing the same thing, right? Because if you talk to anybody on the internet, your favorite influencer, your favorite coach for that matter, a lot of them are kind of following the same, training methods, the same principles, the same rules, right? When it comes to training. And that's especially true when it comes to, training volume. Online, you talk to a lot of guys, and most people kind of all fall in line with the same general recommendations of 10 to 20 weekly sets, right? Same thing with body part frequency. Everyone's promoting higher frequency training. Everybody recommends, hitting body parts twice per week or more, even. Everyone's focused on very stable exercises. A lot of guys are really focusing on machines. They're really focusing on exercises that they deem are optimal for the target muscle, right? And these are all great things. There's nothing inherently bad about it. But again, when you only get your information online, it's very easy to assume that this is how everyone is doing it. And the fact of the matter is, if you step foot into some of the best gyms in the world, you converse with some of the top athletes in the world, some of the best bodybuilders. They can be competitors, even as high as on the Olympia stage, but they could also just be the biggest guys in the gym that no one knows who they are, right? If you converse with these people and you actually look and see what they're doing, if you actually talk with them, and you've actually learned from them rather than just following trends online, you'll start to see a pattern that a lot of people are doing things very different, thinking outside the box, doing things that don't fit the norm, don't fit the mold of what everyone's, preaching online or agreeing, right? And that's not to say that the information online is bad. Most of it is useful. I'm going to actually say that. But the problem is everyone assumes that these rules that everyone promote online, that everybody tends to kind of agree with, everyone tends to, you'll see in their training or what they recommend. Um, if you believe that to be the only way to train, you're probably going to be limiting yourself, right? Because the fact of the matter is, every single day I go to the gym, I talk with and I train with and I see what people are doing. And the fact of the matter is, perfect example, everyone online today, you would assume the only way anybody's training to build muscle is probably following a push pull leg split, maybe upper lower, right? And you'd assume that, a bro split is by far the least effective way to build muscle. But you walk into the gym, what are the best guys doing? Most of them are following some sort of a bro split, right? And now a lot of people won't like to hear that. They're going to argue many other reasons why that works. But you also can't argue the fact that, it's a split that while on paper is definitely less optimal than something like a push pull legs. It's responsible for getting probably 90% of the lifting population, you know, to their goal, right? It's not just the split even used by bodybuilders, it's a split used by almost anybody that's in the gym, right? Now, is the traditional way people run the bro split, you know, an optimal way to train? No, absolutely not. But there's a lot of things you could do to build off of it to make it a very, very effective split. And that's something that I did when I put together the program, old school bro split rebuilt, right? The idea was to take the training method in the split that it's the most commonly used training split in the world, right? Arguably most commonly used training split of all time, and improve on it from where it's lacking. Now, that doesn't mean you need to abandon it completely. You could literally take something that's been working and make it better, right? And that's what I did with this program. And this program is something that I just released recently, and a lot of guys are running it already, saying that they see why it's so effective set up the way I have it. And the fact of the matter is, while the bro split is definitely not, the way most people run it, the best way to do things, a lot of people use it for good reason because it is very effective. It's very effective to focus on one body part. It's very effective to have plenty of rest. But if it lacks the frequency, you're kind of trading that focus for the frequency, right? But I'm here to tell you that you can take that training split and you can build frequency into it, which is what I did. So the bottom line here and the message that I really want to drive home here is, you know, don't be afraid to think outside the box and also do things that's getting people results, even if it doesn't necessarily fall in line with what people recommend online. Because the fact is, these days, if somebody recommends push pull legs online, everybody recommends push pull legs online. If one person recommends low reps, everyone recommends low reps. And I'm here to tell you that if you're not seeing this for yourself in real life, step foot into any gym, talk to any of the guys getting results. They're not all following this same bodybuilding dogma, right? They're experimenting, they're thinking outside the box, and people are getting great results not following the rules that are put in place online. So I'm not here to say abandon it completely, but I'm also here to say think outside the box. And I'm willing to bet that if you can put aside, the bias that you might have towards certain things, and you experiment and you also try things that are getting other people results, especially in the real world, you're going to see growth that you probably wouldn't have expected otherwise. So that's what I wanted to really focus on with this conversation today. If you guys have any questions specifically, about training methods that might not be very popular online, but things that have been tried and true and have gotten people results for long periods of time, I'd like to discuss that today. And I'd also like to kind of, go over maybe some myths or limitations that a lot of you guys might be following that you think is just true. Like, I can't tell you how many guys are afraid to do X amount of sets in the gym because they read online and there's a specific number. Can't tell you how many guys are afraid of doing more or less repetitions because, again, online that might not be the norm. But I tell you, I see this every single day. The guys that are getting the best results are breaking all these rules. It's just the truth. It is what it is, and it's not because the rules online are wrong. It's just because they're confining you into such a small, limited scope of how to actually train that there's application for many other ways to train. That's for sure. And again, the people that post online are a small part of the lifting population. And I'm talking about a small part of even the most successful bodybuilders. I mean, you go watch any competitive bodybuilding show, and you look at the competitors, look at all of them. How many of those guys do you actually follow online, right? And very, very few, because not many of them are online. Yet they're getting the best results out of anybody, right? They're at the top of the game. And you could argue what you want about PEDs and things like that, obviously. But the fact of the matter is there's plenty of guys online promoting PEDs, but also promoting certain limiting beliefs when it comes to training, nutrition, and everything like that. And then there's, again, guys in the gym not following any of that stuff, getting better results, right? So I'm here to tell you guys really to look at what's actually getting people results in the real world, not just what you're learning online. Use the information that you get online, apply it to your training, and if it works, run with it. But if it doesn't, don't be afraid to go outside the box. That's for sure. So I do see that you guys are asking some questions in the chat box. So again, if you guys have any specific questions on this topic, I'd love to dive in it in more detail. But I'm here to do open Q&A as well. So first question is, what are your thoughts on cycling between phases of lower and higher volume? So, I am a proponent of more lower volume training for the point that people tend to think that the volume itself is what's getting you results, when the fact is, it's the intensity, the effort, the progression, and the consistency that's actually getting you results. So if you can do lower volume and accomplish that, doing more volume is not going to get you better results. It's just simply going to beat you up more, right? So I'm a proponent of definitely using the minimum effective volume dose to get the job done. Doing higher volume for the sake of higher volume is not necessarily going to get you better results. Now, with that being said, your version or your variation of lower volume and higher volume is all relative, right? So for me, when I talk about lower volume training, for the most part, like personally, I don't do more than in a single session. On the low end, like something for biceps and triceps, I might do like 4 working sets for that body part in a session. Something like back, which obviously has more areas you need to focus on. You have the lats, the middle back, upper back, lower back, traps, rear delts, things like that. I might be looking at more like 8 to 10 sets in a single session, right? And obviously, I train with a bit higher frequency as well. But with that being said, that's kind of my lower or moderate volume approach. So for somebody else, higher or lower volume might mean something completely different. So I don't like to use that blanket statement, high volume or low volume. But what I will say is, in general, use the lowest volume that you need so that the logbook is driving up. Other than that, there's no reason you need to overthink your training beyond that part. I got to the stage now. I just mix it up, hit RIR machines, free weights, to failure, progressive overload, time and attention. I get the best of all worlds. I got no rules. So, it's funny because what you're saying here, depending on how somebody interprets this, might be great advice. Somebody else might be saying, no, you need to focus on, one thing and focus on that thing only. But at the end of the day, here's the thing. The thing is, over time, the way you're building muscle is obviously consistency is number one. You have to have a plan that you're consistent with, but you also have to have a plan where over the time you can actually measure progress, right? So there's plenty of guys who are brutally strong, who consistently progress week to week that might not even necessarily train with a logbook. Now, I think a logbook is a very, very useful tool. But the fact of the matter is that if you're training in a capacity where you're stimulating growth, you're recovering, and you're doing it again and again over time, and you're being consistent with that long term, you're going to drive progress across the board. Now, it might not be the most effective way to do it by mixing it up every single time you're in the gym. But the fact of the matter is, if you get to the same approach over time, like let's just say you spend a year and you're training very hard, and the beginning of the year, let's say 2026 in January, you're benching, 315 for reps. I don't care what you do, but if, January 2027, you're benching 365 for reps, you're going to be bigger, right? So if your training lines up with that end goal, you're training effectively. So with that being said, if you want to focus on more things like, hitting failure or leaving reps in reserve, I'm not hugely against like varying these things as long as the logbook is driving up. And I think that as long as you're focusing on that, all these other things people mention are kind of like minute details. People argue all day, should you train with reps in reserve? Should you train with slower, rep speed, rep cadence? Should you spend more time with time under tension? Should you train with higher reps, lower reps, right? Higher frequency, lower frequency. And I'm here to tell you that at the end of the day, those things are all tools, but they're all tools to accomplish the same thing. And that same thing is progression over time. If you're able to use any of those tools and drive up the logbook, that's it, man. Don't overthink it after that. And a lot of people think that these little details are what's building muscle, but what's building muscle is the progression long term. So that's why you see people getting results using many different training methods. But if you focus on the progression, that handles all the other stuff. So don't get caught majoring in the minors here. That's really the answer I want to drive home. Nothing wrong with bro science to a point. Mix things up and see how your body responds. So the truth is, it's funny because bro science for a long time was given a bad name, but at the end of the day, you know, bodybuilders who train and experiment over time and also, learn from other bodybuilders and experiment, it's just as good of data to go off of as science experiments run in a training lab, right? Because you can't replace, years and years and years, and thousands upon thousands of people, well, bodybuilders training and not take something away from that, right? You can't say that that's useless data, right? If every bodybuilder does X, Y, or Z and it produces them results, you don't need a scientific study in a lab to tell you that, right? You might find something in a scientific study, training study, that might say the opposite or suggest that what these bodybuilders are doing might not be optimal. But again, when you look at what people are doing in the real world, it would actually be really silly to just discredit that and say, okay, that's not useless information. I'm here to tell you that you know training methods and proof of results over the last 50 plus years by bodybuilders is absolutely effective, data to learn from and apply to your training. I'm not saying that you have to take everything, but I'm also here to say that if you only get your information from a training study done by college kids who they offer free pizza to do the study, you're probably not going to get the best information if your goal is to be as massive and strong as possible, right? Maybe you want to learn from people that have actually done it for decades upon decades. Why would that not be a logical thing to think, right? So on dumbbell presses, does the bar path really make a difference in chest activation? Touching dumbbells on chest as opposed to wide feels more natural. Thanks, great channel. So great question, and one that it's context dependent. So in general, any movement, and dumbbells are great for this, but any movement that you want to get the most out of it in terms of range of motion, you want to aim for the greatest range of motion that's within your own mobility, right? So it's like the argument: should you squat ass to grass or should you stop at parallel? Well, I'll tell you this: if you don't have the mobility to get below parallel, you simply going below parallel just to meet a specific depth is not actually going to build more quads, because you're going to have to use your lower back to get down further because you don't have the mobility to do it with your quads, right? So something like a dumbbell press, ideally you want to go as deep as you can. For me personally, I actually don't like pressing very wide um, on dumbbells, even if that increases the range of motion. I like more of a narrow grip. But with that being said, now this is where it gets context dependent. If you're very strong, you're going to be using dumbbells that are much bigger, right? So if I use the exact same technique when I'm warming up, let's say I'm warming up with 40, 50, 60-pound dumbbells. If I use that exact same technique with the 40-pound dumbbells, and then I get up to my working weight and I'm using 140, 150-pound dumbbells, I'm literally not able to press those in the same exact range of motion as I was with the smaller dumbbells, simply because the size of the dumbbells now change, right? So when you get very strong, the rules tend to change a little bit and you're forced to, right? So at that point, you're not going to be pressing 150-pound dumbbells out very wide to your sides, just simply because the shape and the side of them, and you're naturally going to have to actually bump into your pecs on the outside a little bit. You could do things to alter your technique, but the point I want to drive home here is that textbook technique might be textbook technique when you're using warm-up weights. But when you get very strong, the rules change a bit. And again, this is one of those scenarios where you can, in a lab, decide what's the best way to dumbbell press. And you might find this is the optimal way to press. But I'm telling you, in a lab, they're not testing it out with 150-pound dumbbells, which are much bigger dumbbells, right? Things tend to change a bit. So you can't apply that information about how to dumbbell press properly with 100, if you're using 150-pound dumbbells. If they tested it in a lab with a 40-pound dumbbell, totally different piece of equipment at that point. It's not even shaped the same. So with that being said, again, this is where science and practical applications sometimes don't line up appropriately, and you have to think outside the box and think for yourself. It's totally fine to think for yourself, guys. That's one thing I want to, drive home here is you don't have to just copy what everybody says online. How do you build that Christmas tree? So in general, the Christmas tree generally refers to the lower back. So when bodybuilding competitors get very lean, stage ready, that's a telltale sign that they've gotten lean enough to compete. You'll see that Christmas tree shape on the lower back. Now that is typically, made up of two things. One, having good lower lat development, because the more developed your lower lats are, the more muscles behind you there, and then also your body fat percentage being so low that you could see that detail. You have to be very, very lean, stage lean, to be able to see, striations on your lower back like that, where you really see that Christmas tree detail come out. So it's a combination of getting stage lean and having enough muscle mass back there. You can get shredded, but if you don't have a lot of muscle, it's not going to be very visible. So it's a combination of, muscle and body composition levels. What split do you use to get bigger shoulders? So here's the thing. The shoulders are used more than any other body part in all upper body days, right? So even if you're just training pecs, you're training your front delts. Even if you're just training back, you're training your rear delts, right? If you're overhead pressing, you're working your front delts, but you're also working your side delts to a small degree. And then obviously, when you train your side delts directly, you're training your side delts. So with that being said, the shoulders are one body part that generally don't need to be prioritized as much as other body parts. And perfect example here, as I'm talking about, what do you see bodybuilders actually doing? This is why not a lot of bodybuilders necessarily train with a full shoulder day. You'll see a lot of guys maybe pairing shoulders with chest, and some guys really don't even do a lot of overhead pressing in their training simply because the front delts are worked so heavily in flat pressing and incline pressing that a lot of guys' shoulder training is just comprised of, side delts and rear delts mostly, right? So with that being said, there's no specific split to grow the shoulders. But what I would say is if they're a lagging body part, you're going to want to make sure that you really focus your energy and effort on hitting the side delts and the rear delts because, again, pressing for chest really hammers those front delts a lot. You might want to throw in maybe one overhead press and then spend your time hammering, the side and rear delts. Those are body parts you could generally train with higher frequencies, and no one's really beating themselves up doing lateral raises, reverse pec deck and things like that. So, hitting those more frequently throughout the week. But however you organize your shoulder training, honestly, as long as you're focusing on those parts of the shoulders, that's what's going to be mostly effective for building the muscle. The split itself is just a way that you can organize it, right? With that being said, if you're doing something like a push-pull leg split, and your shoulders specifically are a priority, you might want to train those first in the session. And that's the same thing with any other body part you're trying to bring up. If it's a weak point or a leg muscle group, either train it on its own day completely or train it in the first part of the session when you're actually fresh. Don't leave anything that's a weak point to the back burner of your workout. It's likely going to get neglected. Nothing but truth. The numbers going up are a good sign. Yeah, I mean, it's proof that what you're doing is working. That's why numbers are so important. It's just like when you weigh in on the scale during a fat loss phase. You can argue all day about high carb, low carb, how much cardio you should be doing, meal timing, frequency, things like that. But if you're losing weight at the appropriate rate, what you're doing is working, right? If you're focusing on all these minute details, but that scale weight staying the same and you're cutting, it's not working. It's just not. I don't care what magical formula you followed. The scale isn't going down. It's not working. It's the same thing in the gym. If those numbers are going up, it's working. If it's not going up, it's not working. When I say cycling machine lower and higher volume, I mean the specialization cycles to bring up lagging body parts where intensity and technique are prioritized, but volume driven up on a stubborn body part. So, yeah, what I want to say here is in general, what I want people to look at in terms of volume, right, is and this is the reason why I generally recommend lower volume. You have so much recovery ability, right? Everybody's a little bit different, genetics wise, more than anything else, lifestyle wise too. But some people can just handle more volume in general, but everybody has a volume tolerance, right? And that's not just for one body part, it's for the whole body systemically. So let's just say, arguably, that like you can recover from 100 sets weekly, and that's across your whole body. So whatever, 20, 40, 60, 80, 100. Let's just say you're doing, again, not something I recommend, but for argument's sake, you're doing 20 sets in a session 5 days per week. That's 100. That might be, let's just say, the max you could recover from, right? Now you have to think about where should those 20 sets a session or 100 sets per week get allocated to your body, right? It makes sense logically that if you only recover from 20 sets in a workout or 100 sets in a week, let's say, and that's your max, it makes sense to allocate that volume to body parts that need it the most, right? If you have a muscle, like for me, perfect example, like I said, like biceps and triceps, arguably my strongest body part. It doesn't make sense for me to dedicate 20 sets a week to those body parts when I could utilize that recovery towards something else that needs to come up. Like if I want to bring up my lats, if I want to bring up my legs, I'm going to be allocating more of those sets that I can recover from to those muscle groups. And I'm going to pull down on the other ones because maintenance for a muscle group is much less than what you need to grow it. So if you need to blast the body part with more, frequency, intensity, or even volume, you want to make sure that you're dedicating your recovery ability to doing just that for the muscle groups you need to bring up. When you talk about progressing on technique. You're the only one here talking about it and has had a huge impact on my training. What do you recommend in terms of stretch, rep speed, squeeze, etc.? So yeah, I mean, this is a topic I could talk about all day, and it's one that's very fresh on my mind because I have actually recently adjusted my training technique on a few exercises and body parts. So with that being said, progress is progress, right? So what I like people to do is standardize a technique on a lift. So let's just use a perfect example. Um, I wouldn't call it a perfect example, but it's one that most people understand, right? Let's say that you're using something like, a barbell squat, and you said, okay, my range of motion allows me to go till my, ass touch my calves, right? And that's the range of motion. And right now I'm doing 225 for whatever, 10 reps, right? Over time, I want to keep that technique dialed in and I want to progress long term, right? But now, if you get to the point where you went from squatting 225 or 10 reps like that to now you're up to 315, but over time, slowly, your technique shifted a little bit. Maybe you're not squatting as deep. Maybe you're doing like a below parallel squat. And you go back and maybe you recorded videos and you say, you know what, when I was doing 225 here, my technique was much better. I'm doing 315 here. My technique could be better, right? Rather than now saying, okay, my goal is to go from 315 to 365, let me keep the same weight here. Let me focus on each time I do it, aiming to get back to that perfect technique or whatever that standardized technique is, right? If you're able to now go from 315 without ever increasing the weight or the reps, but now you can do it with that technique that you were doing 225 with, that's a form of progressive overload. And you're arguably going to build more muscle with that 315 than if you kept that technique and went to 365, right? So the technique is just as important. Now, one thing I do want to touch on that as well too is if you have stubborn body parts or body parts that you just can't really get to grow or connect with when you're training, like maybe you don't get great pumps when you do it, you should dial in that technique, pull some weight off the bar, re-standardize that technique, and then focus on progression from there. So for me, my back has always been a body part that I've had to you know, be more specific with my rep speed, my technique, and making sure that I'm actually training the part of the back that I'm targeting within a lift. I've been, able to get pretty big and strong on pressing movements like my chest, my delts, even my triceps. Just focusing on a full range of motion and lifting as heavy as possible. Like those body parts responded very well to that for me. But back was never a body part that I was able to really get that same benefit from, right? And I would say in the last 2, 3 years, I've been able to bring up my back much more significantly by focusing on specific movements, that target my back from different angles. So I don't look at as many exercises, just general back builders anymore. Like I have more that are prioritized for lats. I have more that are prioritized for thickness and middle back, things like that. But one thing I've done recently is I've really pulled back on the weight and really focused on dialing the technique. So for back specifically for me, I'm focusing on using a technique now where I can at least hold each contraction for 1 second. Pause it 1 second in the contracted position, and then I like to do at least 2 seconds on the negative. Right now, by me doing that, I've had to pull weight off the bar. So let's just say I was doing a dumbbell row before. If I was doing maybe at my strongest, I don't even remember. It's not really an exercise that I keep in my training all the time. But let's say I was doing a dumbbell row and I was doing 140 pounds for like 10 reps. Let's just say that that's it. That might be with more of a typical dumbbell row technique, more explosive out of the bottom, control on the way down, but nothing more than that, right? I've recently dialed all my back training into where now I have to hold it 1 second at peak contraction, 2 seconds in the negative. On a dumbbell row, that might actually force me to lower it down to like 90 or 100 pounds, at least for the first couple of times I do it, right? I might get the same exact reps, but what I'm doing is I'm getting way more out of that same movement, but with less weight, right? So each rep that I do, I'm getting more out of, and it's not requiring me to lift as heavy. Now, with that being said, that doesn't mean now I lift light and I squeeze and I do slow negatives. What it means is now that's the standardized technique. From here, my goal is still focus on the same progression long term. And I want to aim to get back up to that 140s for 10 reps, but using this new technique. Now, if I get back to the 140s for 10 reps with this new technique, that is progressive overload without ever adding more weight to the bar, right? Because certain body parts and muscle groups, you need to look at them and you need to evaluate based on how strong I am on this lift. should I be bigger? You know what I'm saying? So, like, if you're lifting a very heavy weight, like, so perfect example, like I dumbbell curl up to 70 pounds, right? For like almost 10 reps. If my biceps were tiny, I'd tell you right then and there, okay, that's an excessive amount of weight. You're not getting anything out of it. Dial back in that form and technique, right? But the fact is, my biceps are one of my best body parts. So obviously, I'm getting, you know, great stimulation out of that weight, right? Something like my back, I've been able to lift some really, really heavy weights, right? But for how strong I am on those movements, my growth is not really where I wanted it to be. Same thing with quads. I've barbell squatted 500 pounds for reps before, full range of motion too. But my quads were not as big. I don't have small quads by any means, but I wouldn't look at my quads and just assume right away that's a 500-pound squatter, right? So those body parts that are not necessarily responding to that kind of weight, even if the range of motion is great and the technique is great, you might actually benefit from slowing down your tempos, adjusting your range of motion so that the body part that you're training is more targeted, right? Because you could barbell squat and literally just grow your hamstrings, your adductors, your glutes, your lower back even, and not get much quad out of it. But you could squat in a way where you take all those body parts out and focus purely on the quads. So you need to look at these things not just weight on the bar over time, which obviously is the most important thing because it's showing progression, but you need to make sure that weight over time is also in line with the technique and form, and you're keeping that standardized based on what you want to do, right? So, like, if I want to grow this body part, I have to dial in the technique, the form, the tempo, and then progress long term. And you know what? If long term you're getting results, you don't need to change anything, don't change it. But if you get to the point where you say, listen, I've progressed, I've added a lot of weight to the bar, but the target muscle is not growing, strip some weight off, focus on a better range of motion, better lifting tempo, and work your way back up over time. So that's where I'm at right now with my back training. And, I'm starting to already see some benefits from it. It's definitely an ego check to certain lifts that, like, if you've been doing them a certain way for a long time, uh, you know, resetting the technique and form might feel weird for first couple workouts, but then again, it's all progression from there, right? So have fun with it once you reset it, but make sure you're being true and honest with each and every rep and set. And your technique is, you're getting the most out of it, not just lifting weight for the sake of lifting weight. All right, guys, I got 3 more minutes here and then I got to run. So I'm going to answer whatever questions you guys have. Didn't get any shoulder progress until I lowered the weight on lateral raises and did 5 sets of 40 reps. Yes, you read that right. It's intense. Sounds insane, but it works. Yeah, I love that, man. I love that. Because science, again, will tell you that 20 reps. And I don't know where this 20 reps came from, but I even heard 30 reps, actually. But again, I don't know where that number came from either. That 20 or 30 reps, whatever, you can get the same amount of results as 5, right? Now, with that being said, that might be a true argument, but at the same time, there's nothing the same about a hard set of 5 and a hard set of 30. Like, it's just not like, I don't need to explain it any further than that. But with that being said, you're saying you're getting great results from doing 40 reps. There's a lot of things going on there. By all means, if it works, keep doing it, man. But it's a perfect example, again, where like science and what's going on in real life don't always line up. What I will say about that, most likely, you said you lowered the weight and you're doing 40 reps. So, like, I'm willing to bet that, like, since you're using a load that you could do for 40 reps, your technique is excellent, right? Because a lot of times on lateral raises, people run into technique issues just because the weight is so heavy, right? Like, I could swing 60-pound dumbbells out to the side and lateral raise them. And don't get me wrong, I could actually get a really good contraction doing that. But I can tell you what, my technique is probably going to be, not probably, definitely going to be much better if I did half that weight, right? 30 pounds. So that being said, you're kind of trading that weight for the technique. And then again, if that technique is more muscle building specific and you're getting more out of each and every rep, yeah, you're definitely going to grow more, whether it's 40 reps or 20 reps, if you dial in that technique better. I think more of the fact that you lowered the weight to a weight that you could do 40 reps allowed you to clean up your technique. And I think that's what's driving the muscle growth more than like the number 40. But at the end of the day, the number of reps you do is really, again, just a marker for progress, right? Like if you're doing 20 pounds for 40 reps right now, and in 6 months you could do 25 pounds for 40 reps, you're going to grow. I don't care if it's 40 reps or not, you know? All right, last question, and I got to run for today. Do you ever do mobility drills before lifts so you can execute with better technique? For example, stretch the lats before vertical presses to reduce the need to arch the lower back and lose tension in the shoulders. So personally, I'm not very big on mobility pre-training, but what I will say, especially as I've gotten a little bit older, I do need to make sure that certain body parts are unlocked. And when I say unlocked, just really ready to be trained that day. Because if they're not, you're not going to get the same contractions, range of motion, or benefit out of a lift that you would get otherwise when you are being when you're more mobile, right, and warmed up. So with that being said, I don't think it's a bad thing to do before training. I think if anything, it can only benefit you. You just have to be willing to put in that extra time. And what I will say is, like for something like the lats, I am really a big fan of opening them up a bit before training, like with doing, like, let's say a pullover, for example, just to make sure that you're increasing the range of motion to where you want it to when you get into your first couple of heavy exercises. A lot of times, you need those lats to kind of be unlocked to really focus on getting the most out of each and every lift and rep that you do for your back training. So if you have body parts that tend to just be a bit tighter when you walk in the gym or they feel kind of locked up, yeah, you should be doing some type of mobility just to make sure that they're unlocked enough so that you could train those body parts correctly. For me, doing things like maybe making sure that I do calf training before I do my heavy leg days works really well because, if your ankles are very tight, you're not going to be able to squat with the same mobility. You're not going to be able to get as deep, and then your quad training is going to be less effective. So I'll also do stuff like that. I'll also train hamstrings generally before I train my heavy quad stuff. Having that pump and having those muscles warm and a bit more loose and mobile before I get to the heavy pressing definitely takes pain out of it, makes the movements feel good, and then my quads get a more effective training session, right? So like right now, these days, when I'm training my entire legs, like I'll generally train calves before I do anything else. Then I'll train hamstrings, and then I'll finish with the quad work. Whereas when I was younger, I used to just walk in, heavy barbell squat, and then move on to my next exercises. Right. With that being said, if you're mobile and you don't feel like you need to do anything, don't. But if you're definitely tighter or locked up anywhere, definitely. Does your Jack training app have multiple programs? So yeah, my Jack training app does have multiple programs. For anybody that's not part of it, if you sign up for the app, when you sign up, there is a questionnaire in there for how many days per week you want to train, what type of training you're looking to do, and then based on that, I can actually set you up with any program within the app. So once you're in the app, if you guys message me, I can say it's all me in there. It's not like I have a team or anything like that. I set you up with whatever plan. So if you want to train 4 days, 5 days, all my programs are in there. I can set you up with it as well. All right, but that's all I got time for today, guys. This was a great live call as usual. So for anybody that's interested, I did link my programs as I spoke about. My old school bro split rebuilt program is in the link in this video description. If you guys want to check that out again, I encourage all you guys who are kind of on the fence with your training, who've kind of been stuck in this place where you're following all these rules online that are really just not getting you where you want to get. I challenge you to think outside the box, man. Like, I really want you guys to try doing things that have gotten people results outside of the little bubble that is social media, fitness, and bodybuilding, right? Because again, this is a very small population of what's going on in the real world. And I'm telling you, the best of the best guys are not following the rigid, strict recommendations that everybody online seems to be following. And again, Bro Split is just a perfect example of what people are doing in real life, getting results, not lining up or matching up with what's optimal online, right? So again, if you guys are in that position where you're not getting the results you want and you want to try something that has produced results more than any other system, grab old school Bro Split rebuilt, give it a shot. I've optimized it to fix the frequency issue. So, and it's funny because I've said this a few times already. Even the science-based guys wouldn't be able to argue. They wouldn't be able to argue and say it's not optimal the way I have it set up. So it's got the heart and soul of the regular old school bro split. But it's optimized enough where, again, I can't see a science-based guy not giving me the, the checkbox. Not that I need anybody to do that, but I also would like to see someone argue against it, and I don't think anybody will. So that's available in the description. Again, you guys can grab that. It's available right now. I have a few hundred guys already running the system. All have given me positive feedback on it already. So you can grab that. If you guys do want to work with me one-on-one, I am taking on new clients. So I did link my coaching services in the description as well. So if you want to grab that program, run it on your own, give it a shot. If you want to work with me directly, hit that link. Otherwise, I'm always available. So if you guys need anything, let me know. I'll catch you guys on the next live.